The phrase, the rallying cry of Sree Guru, one caste, one God, one religion. I can't help but wonder whether this is a utopian idea for just the reality check that data often provides us. Data from the Pew Research Center, and I'll start with you, Shashi, tells us that as recently as 2021, 7 in 10 Indians said that they had friends mostly from within their own caste. And more than 60% of both men and women said that they thought that people should not marry outside of their caste. Most recently, in this past couple of weeks, we have seen this very, very tragic story of a Dalit woman in Orissa, boycotted because she was the person cooking the food in an Anganwadi school. And it took Jai Panda, and well done to him for doing this, to go and have a meal with her for that boycott of her, a 3-month boycott of her. The students stopped going to that school to end. Juxtapose the vision of Sree Guru with the realities that I have just pointed out.
It's a tough one because sadly we in Kerala like to think we're enlightened, and yet we are part of a much larger India where many of these practices still persist. I'm surprised to hear you say 70%.
That's what
most of their friends are from within their caste. I wonder what the sample is, because honestly I don't think that applies to anyone in this room.
I was shocked to see the data.
It would surprise me increasingly, because we go to school with people of other castes and therefore meet them, and we.
But 95% of Indians marry within their own religion.
Marriage and that is something which I agree. I've seen that figure too. I think it's as high as 93% of all Indians marry within their own caste. That's because probably 93% of those marriages are arranged anyway. So the parents would tend to do those with people of their own caste. What Sree Narayana did, but he came into a Kerala that was actually so bad, so much worse than the rest of India, that Swami Vivekananda on his visit to Kerala called it a lunatic asylum because of the incredibly detailed prohibitions. It wasn't just that there was caste discrimination. It was spelt out in the most excruciating detail. How many feet you had to stand from someone before your shadow could fall on them, and to avoid all sorts of things like that. The women of the lower, so-called lower castes had to go uncovered at the top because they were not entitled to cover their bodies. The Dalits could not enter marketplaces. They had to stand outside the marketplace, call out, leave their money on the floor and call out for what they wanted, and the shopkeeper would come take the money without touching them and leave the provision there for them to pick. I mean, it was unbelievably. And remember that this is the Kerala into which Sree Guru was born, and he and a few other enlightened social reformers of that time shook up the society to the stage where today it is amongst the most progressive places in India, where caste consciousness may be there, but caste discrimination is non-existent. And that is something which obviously one would like the rest of India to emulate, but as you rightly point out, with that incident and many other incidents, we are far from getting there.
What is the difference between caste consciousness and caste discrimination?
Caste consciousness would be things like when you're putting forward a candidate for an election, and that's going to happen again soon. You will very much be attentive to which community has a better chance in a particular that's caste consciousness. Whether you call that discrimination or not really, because in politics people expect that it's the counting of votes that determines such elections. Conversely, on the other hand, you would have caste discrimination, which is not eating food cooked by a Dalit, or not going to the home of somebody of a community you don't like, or all of these things. That is what I would call, or denying somebody a job. Now, the challenge, and I've been very frank in my assessment at the end of the book, is that even within Kerala, one would admit that Sree Guru's teachings have not been universalized. The organization he founded, which the Vice President referred to, the SNDP, has largely been reduced to the organization of his particular caste. In other words, it is seen as a vehicle for the advancement and defense of the interests of one caste, rather than a vehicle to promote castelessness, which is ironic. And this is something which I think we are all facing as a challenge in Indian politics, is how do you genuinely get people to think beyond caste when there are so many incentives in society to think within caste.
Before I come to Pavan and Ashutosh, Shashi, briefly, in the beginning of your book, you compare You compare Sri Narayan Guru and his consecration, on that one night, which you very eloquently described, of temples, his rallying cry for everybody to be allowed into places of worship. You compare it to a Rosa Parks moment in the United States of America or Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa. Do you think that if Sri Narayan Guru were living today as a seer, would he engage with politics or would he keep away from it?
No, I think he would not have engaged with politics for one simple reason. He didn't want to do anything that divided people from each other. Anything. His idea was how to unite them, how to bring them together.
And since
politics would have involved standing up in one particular party, that would not have appealed to him. It just wasn't instinctively. See, I'll give you one great story about Sri Narayana Guru, which is in the book, I think, was when the 1921 census was being conducted, they asked him, so what's your caste? And he said, human. So he said, no, we know you're human. We have to write down, the form. He said, yeah, human. So he said, no, they said, here's a list of castes that we've been asked to choose from. Which caste shall we list? And he said to them very firmly, write human. And to this day, he remains the only person, or at least the first person as far as I'm aware, to have ever been recorded in the census of India as human. That's the extent to which he would not accept any labeling that in any way divided. He even refused to call himself a Hindu, though very clearly his practices, his philosophies, and what he did was very much an act of reforming Hinduism. He never chose to break away from it, but he was similarly not a proselytizer. In Sri Lanka, for example, he attracted the great loyalty of a Muslim follower who came to him and was very inspired by his teachings and said, I'd like to convert. And Sri Narayana Guru said, not necessarily, you don't need to convert, be who you are and practice what the values I've taught you. Then the next time Sri Narayana Guru came to Sri Lanka, this chap shows up. And he's put on a saffron robe and is calling himself by another name. And Sri Narayana Guru is very disapproving. He said, you should not do that. You are who you are. Be true to who you are and be the best version of that. Don't try and change. No one needs to convert. That was his kind of approach. So the inclusivity, when you say one caste, one religion, one God, it doesn't mean he wants everyone to follow his God or his caste, his religion. He wants us to think beyond caste and religion into the unifying oneness of all ways of worship.
Okay, so Pavan, I want to come to you. And we'll come to, I think we have to talk about caste and religion somewhat separately. So let's stay with caste for the moment. So you think of, this great man ahead of his times, a real warrior, asks, what is your caste? And he writes human. If anybody did that today, they would be called...
In a third context, by the college I went to. There are many gatherings where I'm principally there as a Stephanian. Or as Pavan said, you're abroad, you're known as an Indian, and you speak for that nationality, etc., etc. We all have multiple identities. So I just thought of this as one more thing, like saying, I went to Campion School, Rajdeep and I have that school in common, some years apart. And it was literally in the same way that he was celebrating a Campionite becoming minister, he was celebrating this. The pushback I got was very interesting. And the one that struck me most strongly was an 18-year-old Dalit blogger. I still have never met her, but she said she was 18, she was blogging, and she wrote this thing saying, this very statement of castelessness is an affectation of the privileged. She said, I could not grow up in India without being conscious of my caste.
And that's what I said, that today anybody who said human as their entry for what is your caste would be called privileged. Okay.
But he was not. He was from a community that is today deemed OBC, but in those days was treated as untouchable.
I know.
And still he took that.
I know, but
it was the oppressed reclaiming their agency.
I understand, but today what the Dalit blogger said to you is what would be said to me if I said, I don't know, my parents never told me my caste and I never bothered to find out and it is not material to me. The Dalit girl would say to me, you can afford to say that because nobody ever said to you, there's a separate glass for you in the kitchen. And we have to all accept these as ways of unlearning and relearning our liberalism. Now, quick reactions. Ashu, can I give it to Ashu first and then Pavan? Yes. Yeah.
No, about the Antony Committee report, I think there was much before that. There was a Gadgil Committee report in 1998, and where the Gadgil very clearly writes that Congress cannot survive if Congress is going to ignore 80% of the population. You have to do the politics of 80% of the population. That means Gadgil very clearly wrote in as many words. See, the problem is that somehow somewhere down the line, we want to not realize that we are not casteist in our nature. And I firmly believe, and I've articulated at many, many points and many, many times, that the problem is that the casteism, this caste identity has to go deeper. In a sense, that those who are lower in the ladder, those who think that they are nichli caste ya choti caste ke log hain, they have to start feeling proud of their caste identity. Because the problem is, through the religion, it has been inculcated in their mind
isn't that a
if you are born in a
contradiction?
particular caste,
Ashu, isn't it a
you are
contradiction?
not, you don't have a life of dignity. And you have to take another birth to get the life of dignity. I think the time has come when somebody in the lower in the caste hierarchy has to feel good that I belong to this caste by birth and there is nothing wrong in it. It is not indignifying me, but I feel very proud about it.
Okay.
I think the time has come, and that is why the pushback is coming, and that is why we see the reaction in the UGC guidelines.
Okay, I have to take questions, but Pawan has to react, and I'll add a question of my own to you and then open it up for the floor. Is it a great failure of liberal politics and communication that the only way that religious orthodoxy or corrosive use of religion in politics has been countered is to not have the language of faith at all, and therefore to not be able to communicate with that 80% that V.N. Gadgil first referenced and then A.K. Antony reportedly referenced?
Okay, let me give you a quick reply.
Yeah.
First of all, whatever my caste, and I'll come to it, it's not intrinsic to the education, exposure, and training and values we inherited for us to use identity to exploit or discriminate somebody. It's not a matter of affectation, but it's genuinely who I think those of a certain time and background were. You asked a question earlier, so I'll quickly answer it. The difference, I'm proud to be a Hindu, not because Hinduism is a xenophobic reaction, but because Hinduism at its most sublime philosophical level teaches me to respect all faiths, teaches me to respect differences of opinion. And I'm proud of that, and therefore so many of my books deal with that aspect of Hinduism. Thirdly, as far as caste and identity and not being aware of it is concerned, Shashi, you see, there is a rootless cosmopolitanism which gripped a lot of people, the anglicized elite studying in metropolitan cities. I mean, let me give you a classic example which most of you may not even believe. When I decided to let my family know that I'm going to marry my wife who's sitting here, and I did so in a place near Banaras in Ghazipur, which is my ancestral hometown, my uncle said, come for a walk with me inside the Haveli compound. And as we walked, in silence, the first question he asked me, what's a caste? And I said genuinely, and that is which I am proud of it, and I also fault it. I said, I don't know. He said to me in Hindi, Bevkoof, uska surname kya hai? So it so happened, I said, Sharma. So he walked for a while and said, Acha Brahmin hai. The point I'm making is that we did not know our gotra. We did not know where our identity was. We could not read the Hindi alphabet, which is my mother tongue, if asked to narrate it. We knew Shakespeare, but not Kalidas. We knew nothing about our cultural roots. And that, if you consider to be progressive, I seriously question it. Because you must be rooted in order to be universal. If you are not rooted, if you cannot say proudly, I am a Christian and therefore I believe in the best in all faiths. Or if you can't say I'm a Muslim, but I believe in the brotherhood of man. Or if you can't say I'm a Hindu, and for the following reasons in Hinduism, I respect all faiths and I respect all people. Then I'm afraid what you are talking is actually the theory without the actual tools to be able to back it. And that is why, against the new takedowns of Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma. Most of the liberal elite is unable to put forward a convincing argument because they don't know enough about their own religion. You have to know. You have to have roots. And that is why I wrote The Great Hindu Civilization. I was attacked by the left and the right. But I believe I should know. And that is why I can counter it.
Okay.